So I kind of fucked up a little while back and I want to talk about it. See, I made a video on the B-sides called All Your Faves Are Trash and That's Okay. And in it, there's this quick throwaway joke where I point out that there's a ton of discourse around certain problematic faves among white people that I don't know much about because I don't be in white folks' business like that too often. And in that moment, a bunch of different white people are thrown up kind of as a quick visual gag that like, I don't know these people, I don't know what's going on, but maybe something bad is going on. Except there's one face up there that really didn't deserve to be there. Yeah, see, that's Amber Heard. And while there's reason to critique Amber Heard that I'll get to later, she really shouldn't have been used as a part of this quick joke here. Like, I would have removed her had I noticed it, but it was such a quick joke and I have so little engagement with the Depp Heard story that when I watched this before posting it after getting it back from my editor, her presence didn't even register. Like, I genuinely couldn't have told you what Amber Heard looked like out of a crew of random blonde actresses before getting ready to do this video. What I'm trying to say is, this is all Babilla's fault. He's trying to sabotage me. Yes, you, Babilla. I know you're watching this because you're editing this one too. Him, the one at the editing bay, that was his joke, not mine. No, actually, it was my fault. And I'm sorry for whomever it may have upset. I should have caught that. And if I'm honest, had I caught it, I probably wouldn't have changed it because I didn't know any better. I just didn't. And one thing I've learned really before that happened was that this case hit a lot of women in a way that I didn't fully understand. It was something that is almost like an unresolved wound for a lot of people, to the point that there is a groundswell of people trying to rectify the public discussion around this case to this day. If I'm honest, I was initially defensive about this because I felt like, I didn't intend any harm, and the whole context of the joke is to imply how I don't know what's going on, etc., etc. But intent doesn't change impact, and the impact is that my lack of knowledge about this story allowed me to place Heard in the same breath as some pretty bad figures in the minds of many, and that was like putting an abuse victim in the same category as their abuser. But that's the thing. To most people, Amber Heard isn't a victim of abuse. That perspective is not very widely understood, even in, we'll say, the progressive world of left tube or bread tube. And I find that fascinating and disappointing. Considering the amount of X is bad and here's why videos, I'm shocked to know that analyzing this story hasn't gotten a ton of traction over here on the allegedly progressive side of YouTube. And that's the thing I want to talk about here, along with, again, apologizing for that joke. But if you watch me, you know that my videos tend not to be X topic thoroughly debunked. That's just not my skill set. And if you're looking for a video, or if you're watching me hearing this particular angle on this story for the first time and thinking to yourself, I've only heard about mutual abuse and, the abuse of men and stuff like that from this case, this is not going to be the video that spells things out with a bunch of evidence to show why a lot of people need to change the way they perceive this case. Aside from the fact that I don't have the stomach for that type of stuff, there are also several videos that do this, including videos from notable peers such as Princess Weeks, Mooncat, and Lindsay Ellis, but probably the most exhaustive account of all the missing details and misinformation comes from a creator called Meduson. I'm not sure if that's how you say her name. I apologize for getting your name right, Meduson, Medusa1, no shade, all love intended. She has hours of detailed documentation going through all the ways that misinformation about this story has really been allowed to carry a narrative that shouldn't have been allowed. But I do feel like it's necessary to explain how I went from just seeing it as a mutually toxic and abusive relationship to recognizing that this is a situation where there was an abuser and a victim, but a victim whose response to their abuse was one of confrontation and escalation, which in a society that doesn't understand abuse, doesn't understand patriarchy and misogyny, people seem to think that those are the same when they're not. For example, the first thing I ever heard about this story, the thing that made me quit it from jump, was this piece of news that Amber Heard supposedly shit on Johnny Depp's bed as an act of revenge or harassment toward him. And I'm sure I'm not the only one who had this be their first and last piece of information on the case. Now, I want to be clear, contrary to what we'll say red pill types in my audience will like to tell you, I am not the type to believe that women are innocent angels and capable of harm toward men. When I say and here believe all women, that doesn't mean all women are telling the truth. It means women who present accusations towards men, especially powerful men, need to be taken seriously. And I think that goes both ways, as I am a victim of both sexual and physical abuse by women and intimate partners. And I have worked with enough boys and men over the course of my time as a teacher and a social worker and done enough research to know that women are capable of acts of violence and harm toward men in ways that often do go unchallenged and underreported. Black men in particular are significantly more likely to be victims of intimate partner violence than other groups of men. Black men are also the only population where the idea of false rape accusations has any real validity, as we are far more likely to receive false allegations than any other group of men. Right now, notable influencer Black China is escaping scrutiny for what seems to be a history of abusive behavior toward her partners, but we're not talking about it. And I'm putting this out here so that people understand this was not me being swayed by my feminist wows and my love for bell hooks. This is me just looking at shit that I think a lot of people haven't looked at. And I didn't look at it because when you hear this story about poop in the bed, it's so absurd and gross and repulsive that your natural inclination is what's the meme? Ugh, brother. Ugh, like
what's that? What's that, brother?
People didn't want to know anymore. I didn't want to know anymore. And I didn't want to have a take on what this actually meant. But that had a lot of repercussions because it meant that certain voices, such as maybe my own, weren't out there addressing the totality of the misinformation happening in this case and the ramifications from it. From a little bit of research, once you get past the first 3 or 4 Google searches, you'll realize that it's highly unlikely that this story is true. First off, the only corroboration comes from Johnny Depp's personal driver, and the story we're supposed to believe is that Amber pooped in what we found out is her own bed as a joke against Johnny Depp. It wasn't Johnny Depp's bed. He wasn't even there when this allegedly happened. Amber's story is that it's possible one of their dogs, who has documented bowel issues, which is something that's corroborated by court testimony, maybe shit on the bed because that's something he had done before. Further, Johnny Depp seems to have a thing for poop jokes. He admitted in court during this trial that he himself attempted to get a friend to shit in front of Amber Heard's door as a joke, expecting again they would blame it on the dog. And then there's this weird story about Johnny Depp and his fellow accused abuser Marilyn Manson attempting to poop on their Hollywood star as a joke. I wish I didn't know these things. I'm sorry for inflicting them upon you, but a point has to be made. When you weigh the actual evidence at hand for this highly notable, very famous incident, the thing that most people know about this story, we're already operating in the realm of misinformation. The most likely figure responsible for this poop is a little dog, and then Johnny Depp himself by way of his peers, and Amber comes in a distant third, all things considered. But what we first heard was Amber Heard was so crazy that she shit in her husband's bed. And there's so many details like this that I encountered from only a cursory glance at the story by watching a few videos and following it up with some good old Google snooping. Another example, one of the biggest elements from the mutual abuse angle here, is that Heard allegedly cut a chunk out of Johnny Depp's finger when she threw a bottle at him during an argument. On the other end, Heard states that they got into a shouting match while Depp was intoxicated, and that he got really violent, breaking a bottle and a bunch of other stuff, and smashed his cell phone into a wall. So at this point, it's he said, she said, right? And if you just stop there, if you're inclined to want to, vilify women, as many of Johnny Depp's supporters are, not all, I'm just gonna be nice and fair to y'all, a bit, but many are inclined to want to find blame in women wherever they can. You're at a minimum like, I don't know. But then you hear the detail that overnight, Johnny Depp used the blood from his finger to write insults on the walls and the mirrors in the room that they were staying in. And I'm sorry, for me, that sounds more like the behavior of a person who is in an intoxicated, possibly manic state doing manic things than a person that was just assaulted by their wife. One quick aside to give a little more detail. This story of alleged assault by Heard is one that I saw come up a lot in pro-Depp circles, and I wanted to really drive home the speciousness of this story. Depp says that his finger was cut when Heard threw a bottle at him. Heard says she doesn't know how his finger was cut. but assumes it was from him slamming his phone on the wall in a rage while he was high during this fight. Even the doctors that initially treated him the night that it happened said that the injury was more consistent with a crushing injury, and also noted that he was still inebriated while being treated. We don't really know how his finger was injured, but considering everything we do know about that night, such as the gruesome aftermath, it's hard to take the story of him being assaulted by Amber very seriously. And again, I'm sorry you have to hear shit like this. At a minimum, I don't hear husband writes insults in his own blood in his wife's hotel room and think, yeah, that's mutual abuse. I'm not a full-on expert in the topic, but I know enough to know how abusers will very often create situations where they can set their abusive behavior and their victim's retaliatory behavior on an equal playing field. If I hit you 10 times and you hit me back once, whether provoked or unprovoked, that's not mutual abuse. If Depp is an out-of-control addict who constantly creates volatile and out-of-control scenarios to which Heard sometimes responds with the same energy, that's not mutual abuse, that's an action and a reaction. This doesn't mean Heard is an angel or that she didn't do harm to Depp in this relationship, but to call this mutual abuse from the things I know make no sense. Now, I know from experience, again, the most annoying people in the world are about to be in my comment section on Twitter and definitely on Reddit complaining about this take and how it's proof that I really hate men and yada, yada, yada. And that's fine. I don't give a fuck. I really only put this part in to tell you guys that because I know you're watching. Thank you for the views. Make sure to put those angry comments in the comment section. It's gonna do numbers for me. Beyond the worst people in the world, I know there will still be some people that put their favorite talking points and pieces of evidence in to prove that Amber Heard was the real abuser here, and somehow she had all the power because women actually have all the real power and gynarchy or something else, and I'm gonna tune y'all out too. But I do wanna make a point that I've been chronically online for 3 years now as a part of this as a career, and I've had more than a few hate campaigns towards me, and one thing I've learned from this is that people can effectively just make up shit or at best take something with the tiniest sliver of truth and just repeat it telephone style in comment sections and on Reddit boards until it becomes basically factual lore and blown out of proportion. Because when you make shit up online, you don't have to look people in the eye to do it. And when people don't like you or they're looking for a reason not to like you, the burden of truth and factuality on whatever bad thing they hear about you is very, very low. So to some people, I am a hotep, misogynist, misandrist. Go ahead in the comments, make up some new lore for me. We'll see what happens. Taking it away from me, there are people that still think that a doctor stated that the injury to Meg Thee Stallion's foot was because of glass. There are still people defending Bill Cosby. There are still people defending January 6th. The thing that we're about to dive into was the fact that misinformation isn't fixed with factual information. People that spread misinformation or believe misinformation will not be fixed by giving them correct information. They don't believe in the misinformation because they think it's true. They believe in it because it's their truth. Does that make sense? These polarized factions on any given topic really can't be budged on anything, especially the ones that attach their identity to a specific take on an issue or topic or whatever. And when we talk about some of these red pill MRA types, I've been dealing with them for years now. Some of the motherfuckers are lost. They just are. And fuck them. I do not care to be nice to y'all anymore. But what this means is, if you're trying to address the harm that happens from these disinformation campaigns, what you're really trying to do is amplify the story that you think is closest to the truth so that it takes up as much space as possible, and so that others that are interested in getting in the dirt and dealing with these people or with these issues are armed with the information to do so. It's cynical, but it's reality. And that brings me to what I really want to talk about in this video, because for the first time in forever, a community here on BreadTube, LeftTube, YouTube, whatever, that usually does or has at least for a good decade plus done a good job of this, kind of folded under the pressure. From a cursory glance at the landscape of, pro Amber Heard or anti Johnny Depp content, it does feel like a lot of people kind of decided to sit this one out. And I have some ideas as to why. For one, for like 15 years now, since this similar thing happened to Anita Sarkeesian in like 2010, we've seen this pattern play out online multiple times. A woman, almost always white, becomes the target of an irrational and rabid hate campaign for a perceived slight against a man or group of men who was innocent and just a poor little boy, just a little small being. Is it small being? A little small being Johnny Depp. For Anita Sarkeesian, it was her feminist frequency videos, which just ruined video games somehow. And then 5 years later, it was Gamergate. And then we have the aforementioned Meg Thee Stallion, and most recently Amber Heard. And this isn't counting the multitude of smaller scale campaigns that have happened in between to a multitude of other women. I've heard a lot of people say that the backlash toward Amber Heard is really a backlash toward Me Too. But I kind of disagree with that because Anita Sarkeesian and Gamergate are both before Me Too. I'm also old enough to remember the response to Monica Lewinsky, Lorena Bobbitt, Anita Hill. Hell, want to go back to the Salem witch trials, Cleopatra, Eve? This is just what the world is to an extent for women. And today on the internet, it gets to be magnified and monetized and amplified for clout and clicks and, you know, public branding or something. It's created whole movements and careers for marginally attractive or outright ugly guys in beards to yell at the screen about wokeness or DEI, or what was the thing a couple of months ago, Little Baby Incorporated, Super Baby Incorporated, you know, I need more fuckable women in video games, whatever the new nonsense is. That is what this is about, and that's what it's always been about, especially when the campaign is also in service of a powerful or popular man. So this means two things. For one, it's exhausting and difficult to be righteous with these types of things because the voices against you will be loud, innumerable, and inexhaustible. They will be arguing with the backing of the status quo, and it won't just be right-wing red pill men. It will be genuinely most people. Men and women alike, right-wing nut jobs, moderate centrists, and even some so-called progressives. And if you stand against those groups in the name of a victim, you're literally going against the natural order and opening yourself up to so much scrutiny and hate. So it better be damn worth it, which brings me to my next thing. Despite seeing her as a victim of abuse, I don't like Amber Heard. I don't. Not feeling it. I'm going to try to be careful here because I don't want to mince words too much or give too much fuel to the hate campaign that she's still suffering from. But I also read that like right after Johnny Depp, she dated Elon Musk. And it's like, ma'am. Oh, when I see that piece of information, it makes me see Amber Heard as a great microcosm for how white-centered feminism is fundamentally broken. While I think it is somewhat inaccurate to say this was explicitly a response to Me Too, I can't deny that is a factor, but that brings me to the fact that the Me Too movement was originated by a black woman who was almost immediately erased from the movement's public visibility once white women became a part of it. And it was op-eds like hers. The op-ed of Heard, by the way, was kind of the starting point of Depp seeking revenge through courts. It's a long story. Again, check out those other people. But that op-ed is a perfect example of how that erasure happened. I don't think Heard was thinking about erasing black women when she wrote it, but the way whiteness and white feminism work, you don't ever have to think about the consequences of it because you're right there within it. And to be fair to Amber Heard, from what I understand, the op-ed ballooned far outside of the original intentions that she had in mind for it due to editors and writers at the Washington Post that knew that a pretty white woman talking about being abused was going to mean clicks and ad revenue, and that's all that mattered. But I do think that in Heard show this profound way that white women are tethered to white men in our society. As I mentioned in another video, white women are the only population that is so clearly split between trying to be seen as an oppressed group while also in many ways supporting and identifying with their oppressors. Just over half of white women regularly vote for Republican and conservative candidates, even as they prove over and over that their goal for them is the handmaid's tale. Historically, white women will have things like that happen over and over and then still fail at allyship with oppressed people. In America, the suffragettes, while lobbying for their own right to vote, lobbied against to vote for black people. Some of you that watch me know the jaw-dropping story of the white woman that changed Sojourner Truth's "Ain't I a Woman" speech so that she would sound more like a slave. Margaret Sanger, a hero to reproductive rights nationwide, also supported eugenics for women of color. And let's not forget the long history of white women's false claim about black men's sexual violence being a running theme for racist terrorism in America. Like literally hundreds of riots, thousands of dangling bodies on trees because a white woman lied on a black man. That is history. That is not Hotep conspiracy theories. That's not apologia. That's facts. I am not inclined to respond to the calamities of white women when they are harmed by white men, greatly because historically the exposure to that harm for so many white women is preferred over actual solidarity with other oppressed people. And yes, I do say other oppressed people because despite this paradoxical situation, white women are still very much oppressed by white men. I bring all of this up because what hit me about Amber Heard is that there was a genuine lack of black attention paid toward her case. And I genuinely think that's why a lot of people didn't come to her defense, because in this perverted way, if black people aren't pointing to the injustice, it's almost like certain politically inclined folks don't think it's real or don't think it's serious, or more importantly, don't see any value in it. And we have a case study of this that just happened with D'Angelo Wallace after he made a video about Cody Ko and his alleged assault of Tana Montague. It was his black voice and his platform that got the rest of the left-wing commentary space to get active on this story that had been bubbling below the surface, what I understand, for months, if not over a year, if not years. And Tana, much like Amber Heard, was not a perfect victim, was not the image of abuse that we are comfortable defending, which also brings me to the real insight I want to share about all of this. The biggest reason to me that Amber Heard was left out to dry by so many people isn't just because she wasn't an imperfect victim, but because we are very much imperfect advocates and allies. And in that, I mean, there wasn't much to gain for advocating her. And conversely, as I said earlier, there was a lot to lose. And that should tell us a lot about what allyship is based on when it comes to social media and these platforms. So much of managing this type of career is managing clout and brands and responding to what the market and the people seem to want. And I'm never going to be overly critical of that because I don't think there's anything wrong with that as a content creator. People play the hits because the hits are good. It is what it is. But we're also influencers, or I prefer to look at us as journalists, educators, maybe even documentarians. And in that regard, our job is to tell people what we think they need to hear or learn about a given issue, even when it's not popular or easy to do so, or more specifically, when there's not a ton of value in it. There was no market demand to amplify the parts of this story that exposed Johnny Depp as the real abuser. In fact, it was the opposite. There was much more value in showing Amber Heard to actually be the abusive party because that was more novel, would get much more clicks, and was a more interesting narrative to push through social media. Or at best, we got the mutual abuse narrative, which let everyone off the hook. And even as the hate movement increased toward Amber, we don't see anyone sticking their neck out for her because she was an imperfect victim, and it made it hard to do so. Or more accurately, maybe, it made it easy to rationalize not being the one to take the risk. And all of that lends itself to there being less of an opportunity to build a coalition of support or resist misinformation and stand up for the victim in this case, or victims in general. And in many ways, I empathize with creators who came to that conclusion as it regarded this case, because I am one of those people. But it does require us, myself again included, to do some self-reflection along with our audiences. Think about this for a second. If you watch me, then you probably have seen H-Bomber Guy's video on YouTube Plagiarism, which spends 2 hours breaking down the plagiarism of James Somerton. No, this is not the Nebula ad read yet. I'm making a point still. Stick around. That video has like maybe 7 million views by now, and it brought a ton of attention to what James was doing. But if you watch that video, then you also know that James had been caught plagiarizing multiple times. But because of the size of his channel, because of the clout he had, even though it wasn't a huge channel, it was big enough that it was able to squash out the many people that were accusing him of plagiarism, some of them whose work was directly stolen. But despite that, he was never stopped. The environment for justice as it exists on social media and these platforms can't produce justice without the power of clout. It takes an H-bomb or someone else amplifying the story in order for it to be real. So what H-bomb did wasn't so much an exposure of James Somerton, he just ensured that his harm would be taken seriously. And after that, the environment in social media changed. And that should tell you really what our role is as creators or influencers or whatever. And more importantly, I hope it also makes you, the viewer, much more critical about what you're consuming and what you're consuming means and does, and what it doesn't mean and doesn't do. This type of content is still media. You are not immune to propaganda, and even the righteous space of BreadTube/LeftTube or in Cornbread Tube is a manufactured sphere of influence that reflects a specific reality and a truth, but not the reality and the truth. Because at best, we will just reflect what we think you all want, and at worst, we'll sit on our hands when we think what you all want isn't something we're comfortable giving. Even if it means that an abuse victim suffers a massive harassment campaign, and abuse victims everywhere feel like their stories and experiences are being erased and unheard by the people who purport to care about them. I mentioned earlier that several people talked about this issue before, such as my label mates, Princess Weeks and Lindsay Ellis. Princess even makes a short appearance in a Netflix documentary, which again, not perfect, but will give you a little detail on how this was fucked up. And Lindsay discusses Amber Heard in her video about Yoko Ono and the Beatles, drawing a connection between the bizarre hate campaign that came against Yoko Ono after John Lennon's death and what Amber Heard went through, among other things. It's a masterwork of a video essay that is finally now on YouTube, but with the usual ads and censorship YouTube requires, and you could have seen it without all that months ago, ad-free, censorship-free, if you had signed up for my streaming service, Nebula. For years now, Nebula has been known as a premier streaming platform for some of YouTube's most talented and ambitious creators, such as PhilosophyTube, the aforementioned H-Bomber Guy, Cat Black, Tirzu, and of course myself. All of us for a while now have used Nebula as a haven to ensure that the vision we have for our content can be kept somewhere where we don't have to worry about algorithms, unfair copyright restrictions, demonetization bots, etc. It's also a place that we can put stuff that can't live on YouTube because it's maybe too controversial, such as my video on the masculinity of Tupac or Maggie Mae Fish's series about sexuality in film. Everything I just mentioned you is still a thing and still a valuable part of Nebula. However, I really want to make sure people understand that Nebula has evolved recently. We went from this alternative streaming service for, great YouTubers to a legit independent movie studio. Nebula has released 2 short films this year with others in production. We also have higher quality legit docuseries on the site and more of those in production, along with podcasts, travel content, and even a reality show. We are expanding to try to create one of the most unique spaces on the internet for independent and forward-thinking content. And we only maintain that independence because of you. We're not owned by Google or any big tech companies. Our ability to fund our work comes directly from you, the consumer, which is why this ad exists. So help us, help me create the type of content that we want by signing up to Nebula, using my promo code Signify B-Sides for 40% off, or just clicking the link in the description. In doing so, you'll not just be keeping our vision afloat, but you'll also be contributing to new visions for hundreds of independent creators on the site. Thank you so much for watching. Thanks to Nebula for sponsoring the video. I'm FD Signifier, and this has been Lightwork.